War Sovereign Soaring the Heavens, Chapter 771. The azure-eyed eagle carried Duan Ling Tian's group of 3 and had just approached Skywolf Fort when a person flew out of Skywolf Fort to directly stop the azure-eyed eagle. This person was a middle-aged man that wore a green-colored uniform. The middle-aged man had an ordinary appearance, and on the left chest of the green clothes was a special badge that possessed a savage skywolf pattern inscribed on it. The eyes of the skywolf were copper-colored. "Why have you come to our skywolf fort?" the middle-aged man asked. "We're members of the Darkhan dynasty, and we've come here to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties." Feng Wu Dao explained their reason for arrival here. The middle-aged man's gaze descended onto Duan Ling Tian and Feng Tianwu when he heard Feng Wu Dao, and then it finally locked onto Duan Ling Tian while revealing slight surprise. As far as he was concerned, this violet-clothed young man ought to be one of the 10 young geniuses of the Darkhan dynasty that had obtained the qualifications to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties, and Duan Ling Tian was so young that he couldn't help but be surprised. As for the red-clothed young woman, he thought that she'd come to join in the fun because her age was truly too young. "Please follow me." The middle-aged man led the way ahead. Meanwhile, Feng Wu Dao asked the azure-eyed eagle to wait outside the ancient desert city before following the middle-aged man with Duan Ling Tian and Feng Tianwu to head all the way west. All along the way, Duan Ling Tian curiously sized up the surroundings. The Skywolf Fort was divided into 2 areas. The area they were in now was the area that was towards the south and was as large as the Darkhan dynasty's capital, and there was a combat arena standing in this vast area. There were no spectating areas around this combat arena, and people could only stand in the air to watch for the surroundings. That place is the combat arena. The martial competition of the 10 dynasties will be held on 10 days from now, the middle-aged man introduced. Not long after, Duan Ling Tian's group of 3 approached a continuous complex of buildings under the lead of the middle-aged man, and these buildings were all pavilions. Every single pavilion had a plaque hanging on it, like Chrysanthemum Pavilion, Osmanthus Pavilion, Peony Pavilion, and so on and so forth. There were high and low pavilions amongst them, and all of them were named with flowers. When he approached the pavilions, Duan Ling Tian noticed that a middle-aged man that wore a similar green-colored uniform was leading 8 people to enter into a pavilion that had 4 floors. Those 8 people ought to be from one of the dynasties. Duan Ling Tian thought to himself. In next to no time, Duan Ling Tian's group of 3 had arrived before a pavilion that had 2 floors under the lead of the middle-aged man. "This Narcissus Pavilion will be your residence. Besides that, please register your name and your dynasty with me, little brother." The middle-aged man spoke as he took out a brush and paper. Duan Ling Tian nodded, and then he spoke his name and his origins. "You're registering people that are participating in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties?" the nearby Feng Tianwu asked. "Yes." The middle-aged man nodded. "Then add my name in," said Feng Tianwu. The middle-aged man was first stunned when he heard this, and then he reacted to Feng Tianwu's words, causing his gaze that was filled with disbelief to descend onto Feng Tianwu. "Could it be? You're a young genius from the Darkhan dynasty that's participating in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties." At the beginning, he thought only Duan Ling Tian was a young genius from the Darkhan dynasty that had obtained the qualifications to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. Even then, he was shocked by Duan Ling Tian's age. A young man that looked to be around the age of 25 actually being able to become eminent amongst the group of young experts in the Darkhan dynasty was truly something that was rare and commendable. Yet now, when he realized that Feng Tianwu was a young genius that had come to participate in the martial competition as well, he was shocked. This red-clothed young woman looked to be a little over 20 at most, and even if she took good care of her appearance, she would be around 25 at most. Looks like there aren't any outstanding geniuses in the younger generation of the Darkhan dynasty. Otherwise, how could they allow two people that were so young to seize the qualifications to participate in the martial competition? The middle-aged man registered Feng Tianwu as he thought as a matter of course. After he finished registering them, the middle-aged man gave Duan Lingtian's group of 3 a command token each. These 3 command tokens will allow all of you to move freely within the outer fort of our Skywolf Fort. As for the inner fort, it's prohibited to everyone but disciples of our Skywolf Fort. Gather on the combat arena in the outer fort 10 days from now. At that time, the young geniuses from the 10 dynasties will be gathered to carry out the martial competition of the 10 dynasties. As soon as he finished speaking, the middle-aged man left directly. Whereas Duan Lingtian's group of 3 entered into Narcissus Pavilion. There was a total of 2 floors in the Narcissus Pavilion, and every single floor was extremely spacious and had 2 rooms and a balcony. Subsequently, Duan Lingtian's group of 3 settled down in Narcissus Pavilion. After he entered into his room, Duan Lingtian sat cross-legged on his bed and calmed his heart before starting to cultivate. 9 dragons war sovereign technique, sword dragon form. Presently, Duan Lingtian only had a single urgent target, and that was to comprehend sword concept. So long as he comprehended sword concept, he would be able to cultivate the high-grade heaven rank martial skill, 9 dragons radiant flash. If I'm able to successfully cultivate the 9 dragons radiant flash before the martial competition begins, then my strength will surely improve a step further. Duan Lingtian immersed his entire body and mind into cultivating, and he seemed to have forgotten the time. Big Brother Duan. Big Brother Duan. After an unknown amount of time, a wave of anxious sounds entered into the room and Duan Lingtian's ears, and it caused Duan Lingtian to awaken from his cultivating. Tianwu. Duan Lingtian opened the door and looked at Feng Tianwu who stood outside the door. Has the martial competition started? Why do I feel that I've only cultivated for a short time? Big Brother Duan, there's still another 5 days before the martial competition. I called you out because Big Brother Zhang has come twice, and he has asked us out for a meal. Feng Tianwu smiled. Duan Lingtian walked out of Narcissus Pavilion with Feng Tianwu, and he noticed Zhang Xiaoyang was already waiting outside. Big Brother Zhang. Brother Lingtian. Zhang Xiaoyang returned a smile and said warmly, let's go have something to eat. I've arrived at the Skywolf Fort for 3 days yet I still haven't gone out to have a good stroll. All right. Duan Lingtian nodded, and then he said to Feng Tianwu, Tianwu, go tell Uncle Feng. Feng Tianwu nodded, and then she went to notify Feng Wudao. Brother Lingtian, you're really something. You even have a wife that follows you in everything. Zhang Xiaoyang joked. Duan Lingtian laughed bitterly. Big Brother Zhang, you know that I have little Fei and the others. So, don't make this sort of joke in the future. I and Tianwu are only ordinary friends, and we don't have the type of relationship that you imagine. Aren't you the son-in-law of Lord Wudao? It's spread all over the Darkhan dynasty. Zhang Xiaoyang was stunned. It's difficult to explain. Duan Lingtian sighed. Meanwhile, Feng Tianwu had returned, so he didn't explain further. Let's go. Duan Lingtian's group of 3 soared side by side into the sky, and they left the Skywolf Fort in the blink of an eye before looking around to search for a nearby restaurant. In next to no time, they found a restaurant that was comparatively large in scale. After they sat down at a table that was by a window, Duan Lingtian couldn't help but stretch out his spiritual force to envelop Zhang Xiaoyang, and he detected Zhang Xiaoyang's cultivation at the first possible moment. First level of the void interpretation stage. Big brother Zhang has broken through as well. Even though Duan Lingtian wasn't surprised by this, he was happy for Zhang Xiaoyang. He'd known Zhang Xiaoyang before he knew Feng Tianwu, and Zhang Xiaoyang had saved his life once. So he'd always maintained his previous respect to Zhang Xiaoyang and took him as a big brother. Oh! Aren't these the experts of the Darkhan dynasty? You seem to be called Zhang Xiaoyang. Suddenly, an irritating voice approached from afar. At the same time, two young men around the age of 37 or 38 and were almost middle-aged man walked over side by side to stand before Duan Lingtian's table, and the blue-clothed young man amongst these two people was looking at Zhang Xiaoyang with a ridiculing gaze. What? The lesson I taught you yesterday isn't enough. Zhang Xiaoyang glanced at the blue-clothed young man with disdain, and then he shouted coldly. FK off. The expression of the blue-clothed young man went grim, and he said with a cold voice, Zhang Xiaoyang, I admit that I'm not a match for you. But your opponent today isn't me. When he spoke up to here, he looked at the thin young man with a sedate expression who was by his side, and a modest expression suffused his face. Big brother Kong, yesterday, it was he who said that all the young geniuses of our Darka dynasty that have come to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties are trash and had suffered defeat at his hand. Zhang Xiaoyang frowned slightly. When did I say all this? But when he saw the icy cold gaze of the thin young man sweeping over, he couldn't be bothered to explain. If he were to explain at this moment, then it would undoubtedly cause his imposing manner to seem inferior to the other young man. Even though Duan Lingtian who sat at the side didn't know what had happened, but he discerned some clues from the words the blue-clothed young man spoke. The young man was obviously slandering Zhang Xiaoyang. He knew Zhang Xiaoyang for more than a day or two, so he naturally knew that it was impossible for Zhang Xiaoyang to say something like this. You yourself aren't a match for him, so you looked for another to help you at all costs. I don't know about everyone else, but you're surely trash. Duan Lingtian slowly raised his head to look at the blue-clothed young man before speaking indifferently. What did you say? The expression of the young man in blue clothes darkened, and he glared angrily at Duan Lingtian as the origin energy on his body raged. However, he didn't dare make a move, and his fearful gaze swept past Zhang Xiaoyang. He knew clearly in his heart that unless Zhang Xiaoyang was held up by the person by his side, otherwise, it was impossible for him to injure this violet-clothed young man that called him trash. So, even though he was enraged, he could only endure it for now. Kid, I'll tear you to pieces. The blue-clothed young man's voice transmission that was filled with ruthlessness fiercely pierced into Duan Lingtian's ears. Duan Lingtian started laughing. A 9th level void initiation stage martial artist wants to tear me to pieces? You said you want to tear me to pieces. A ridiculing smile appeared on the corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth as he looked at the blue-clothed young man. Then why aren't you making a move? Or perhaps you're afraid of my big brother Zhang, so you didn't dare make a move until now. If it's like this, I can guarantee that big brother Zhang will absolutely not interfere if you make a move. Duan Lingtian's words directly exposed the blue-clothed young man's thoughts. I hope you enjoy the video. Don't forget like, share, subscribe to channels.